The first lie was the smell of bleach. It was 2 in the afternoon, and the sharp chemical scent was a violent intruder in our usually scentless home. I found Lena, my stepmother, on her hands and knees, scrubbing a pristine patch of the hardwood floor in the foyer. Her shoulders were tight, her movements frantic. "Lena?" I asked, pausing with my backpack still on. "What's wrong?" She jumped, a hand flying to her chest. "Kai, you're home early." Her smile was a brittle, quick thing. "Nothing's wrong. Just spilled some red wine last night." Stubborn stain. It was a lie. My father didn't drink red wine. Lena only drank white. I said nothing, the instinct a quiet hum under my skin. I'd learned, in the 2 years since she'd married my father, that Lena's world was built on a foundation of small, unnecessary untruths. She lied about where she bought her clothes, about calling her mother, about liking my father's cooking. They were harmless, my father said. Quirks. But bleach for a wine stain that didn't exist wasn't harmless. That night the second lie arrived. My father, a history professor with a perpetually kind and slightly absent-minded air, was looking for his favorite fountain pen. "The silver one, Lena? Have you seen it?" "Oh, darling," she said, not looking up from her tablet. "I think you left it at the university last week. You mentioned it after your lecture." My father's brow furrowed. "I did?" He shrugged, accepting it. He always accepted her reality. I went to my room, the hum growing louder. I'd seen that pen on his desk yesterday. When the house was silent, I crept into his study. The pen was gone. But tucked behind the leg of his heavy oak desk, half hidden by the baseboard, was a single, lustrous black pearl. It was tiny, flawless, and utterly alien in this context. It felt cold and heavy in my palm, a secret weight. The lies were no longer small. They were a trail, and I had found the first breadcrumb. I began to watch her with a new, focused intensity. I tracked her charity committee meetings that ran long, her girls' nights from which she returned without a trace of alcohol or laughter. I followed her one Tuesday to a part of the city where the buildings were sleek and anonymous. She didn't go to a restaurant or a spa. She entered a discreet, high-security storage facility called Eterna Vaults. My heart thudded against my ribs. You don't rent a unit at Eterna Vaults for old Christmas decorations. The final lie, the one that broke the dam, was about my mother. My father had kept one of her old sweaters in his closet, a soft, cable-knit thing that still held the faintest ghost of her perfume. One day, it was gone. "Lena, have you seen Alara's sweater?" My father asked, his voice thick with a sadness that never fully faded. Lena's face was a perfect mask of sympathetic regret. "Oh, Robert, I'm so sorry. I was airing it out on the balcony last week, and a sudden gust of wind, it was gone. I've been sick about it." I stood frozen in the hallway. I had seen her 2 days ago, carefully folding that very sweater and placing it into a vacuum seal bag. Her movements deliberate and cold. That was the moment the quiet hum inside me turned into a clear, cold directive. Her lies were a spiderweb, and I was tired of being caught in the strands. It was time to find the spider. Using my father's name and a story about verifying contents for an insurance claim, I managed to get limited, view-only access to the records of her storage unit at Eterna Vaults. The digital inventory loaded on the screen. It wasn't filled with family heirlooms or financial documents. It was a collection of lies given physical form. There were stacks of bearer bonds, a velvet pouch filled with black pearls identical to the one I'd found, and a stack of passports, each with Lena's photo, but different names. My stepmother wasn't just a liar. She was a ghost, a woman who had meticulously constructed a new life, and my kind. Trusting father was her perfect, unsuspecting cover. The revenge I had envisioned, a confrontation, an exposure, suddenly seemed childish. She lived in a fortress of deception. To destroy her, I wouldn't need to break down the walls. I would simply need to remove the foundation, one carefully extracted truth at a time. I closed the laptop, the cold weight of the black pearl a comforting anchor in my pocket. Her lies had built this prison. I would make sure they became the only truth she had left. The black pearl was a cold, smooth secret in my pocket. Lena's lies were no longer abstract, they had texture, weight, and a staggering monetary value. A conventional revenge, a screaming match, throwing the pearl on the table, would be useless. She would simply spin another lie. A masterpiece of tearful explanation that would make my father the villain for doubting her. I had to be smarter. I had to make the walls of her own deception close in on her so silently. She wouldn't notice until it was too late. My first move was to become her greatest admirer. Lena, I said over breakfast the next morning, my voice dripping with newfound respect. That story you told about your charity gala, it's incredible how much you've accomplished. You should document it, for Dad's sake, he'd love to see it. She preened, her eyes lighting up with narcissistic delight. Oh, Kai, that's a wonderful idea. I became her archivist. I encouraged her to tell her stories. And I recorded them on my phone, not the audio, but my meticulous notes in a dedicated journal. I asked clarifying questions, feigning fascination. So the Duchess gave you that compliment in Paris? Which arrondissement was that again? The yacht you summered on in Monaco, what was its name? I was building her a prison of her own words, a comprehensive catalogue of her fictional past. While she basked in the attention, I began the real work. The Black Pearl was my key. I found a specialized auction house downtown that dealt in rare gems and jewelry. I showed the pearl to an elderly, sharp-eyed appraiser. South Sea, he murmured, turning it under his loupe. Excellent luster. Part of a notable private collection that was dispersed. Unofficially, about 5 years ago after a rather messy divorce. The wife took them. He gave me a knowing look. There were 24 in the set. 23, I thought, are in a vault. And one is in my pocket. The messy divorce was my next thread. It took days of digging through old society news archives, but I found it. A shipping magnate named Alistair Finch, his much younger wife, Cassandra. And a scandalous split where she allegedly vanished with a fortune in portable assets. There was a single, grainy photo of Cassandra Finch leaving a courthouse. Her face half hidden by large sunglasses and a scarf. But the line of her jaw, the arrogant set of her shoulders, it was Lena. I had her real name. Cassandra Finch. A woman who hadn't just lied about her past, she had stolen it from someone else and buried it. The final piece came from the storage facility. Using the login credentials I'd socially engineered, I monitored the access logs. Lena visited every Tuesday at 2 p.m., like clockwork. Her paradise. Her temple of lies. I needed to know what she did in there. Was it just admiration? Or was she planning her next move? The following Tuesday, I was waiting across the street, hidden in a coffee shop. At 1:58 p.m., she arrived. But she wasn't alone. A man joined her. Tall, sleek, with the predatory grace of a lawyer or a fixer. They didn't embrace. They spoke in low, Intense tones for a moment before he handed her a slim document folder. Then they entered the vault together. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about the past. This was about the future. She wasn't just hiding, she was planning. The lies weren't just for comfort, they were for a final, devastating score. My father wasn't just her cover, he was her mark. I looked down at my journal, filled with her elaborate fiction. I looked at the photo of Cassandra Finch on my phone. And I knew my revenge would not be a single, explosive revelation. It would be a slow, meticulous unraveling. I would take every lie she had ever told my father and stitch them together into a noose. She thought her lies were a shield. I would prove they were the very thing that would hang her. The man was the key. While Lena, or Cassandra, spun her golden tales for my father each evening, I hunted her accomplice. The sleek man from the vault didn't leave a deep digital footprint, but he had a pattern. A black sedan with tinted windows dropped him off and picked him up. I noted the license plate, a string of numbers that became my new obsession. It took a week of patient, invisible effort. A freelance investigator I found through layers of anonymous forums finally delivered a name. Julian Croft. He wasn't a lawyer. He was a wealth strategist, a euphemism for a man who helped the newly rich hide their money. Or in this case, help someone hide wealth they had stolen. The folder he'd given Lena wasn't just any document. My contact, for a significant extra fee, provided a grainy long lens photo of its contents. A draft of a new will for my father. The air left my lungs. This was no longer about a hidden past. It was about orchestrating a future where my father's entire estate would flow directly to her. The grieving widow, before vanishing into the labyrinth of shell companies Julian Croft undoubtedly managed. The bleach, the pen, my mother's sweater, they were all just rehearsals for this, the ultimate lie. I couldn't just expose her. I had to make her expose herself. I needed a witness my father would believe without question. I needed her to confess to the one lie that would unravel all the others. I chose my mother's birthday. The one day of the year my father's grief was a tangible, fragile thing. He always visited her grave in the morning, returning quiet and contemplative. This year, I made sure I was home when he returned. Lena, sensing his mood, was performing a masterpiece of sympathy, her voice a soft, soothing murmur. "It's a beautiful thing, how much you still love her, Robert," she was saying as I entered the room. "It's so rare. I feel like I know her, just from your stories." It was the perfect opening. The trap I had been building for weeks was ready. "Did you know," I said, my voice cutting through her performance, "that Mom almost became a marine biologist? Before she met Dad." My father looked up, a sad, fond smile touching his lips. "She did. She loved the ocean. Always said she wanted to study pearl oysters." Lena's smile was perfectly in place, but her eyes were cautious. "Is that so?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the single, lustrous black pearl. I held it up, letting the light catch its deep, otherworldly glow. "It's funny you should say that, Lena. Because I found this in your closet." The air in the room solidified. Lena's smile didn't falter, it froze. A rictus of panic masquerading as confusion. "My closet? Kai, that's not possible. It must be one of your trinkets." "It's a South Sea pearl," I continued, my voice calm and conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "Part of a set of 24, I'm told. From the collection of a Cassandra Finch." I let the name hang in the air, watching the blood drain from her face. The story goes that Cassandra took them during her divorce from Alistair Finch. Vanished without a trace. I turned to my father, whose face was a canvas of dawning, horrified confusion. Dad, you remember me asking about that pen you lost? And Mom's sweater? Lena told you she lost them. But she didn't. She hid them. Just like she's hidden her entire life. Lena found her voice, a sharp, desperate weapon. He's lying, Robert. He's always been jealous. He's making up stories. I have proof, Lena. Or should I call you Cassandra? I said, my gaze locked on hers. I know about the vault. I know about Julian Croft. And I know about the new will you're having him draw up. The final lie was the most devastating. Because it was the truth she had fought hardest to bury. The name Cassandra Finch was a ghost she had tried to kill. And I had just given it a voice in the one room where she felt safest. Her composure shattered. The mask of the perfect, caring wife fell away, revealing the cold, cornered woman beneath. You have no right, she hissed, her voice low and venomous, all pretense gone. You have no idea what I had to do to survive. What I had to become. In her fury, in her desperate attempt to defend the indefensible. She had just confirmed everything. My father stared at her, the last vestiges of his belief in her crumbling into dust. The revenge was no longer mine alone. It was his. He was seeing, with brutal clarity, the architect of the lie he had been living. And in that moment, her paradise of deception became a prison of her own making. And the walls were finally, irrevocably, closing in. The silence after her confession was more damning than any scream. Lena, Cassandra, stood there, her chest heaving. The ghost of her real self staring out from behind her panicked eyes. The performance was over. My father didn't shout. He simply, deflated. His shoulders slumping as if the strings holding him up had been cut. He looked from her face to the black pearl still gleaming in my hand. And the last of his world crumbled. Cassandra Finch, he whispered, the name a foreign, poisonous thing on his tongue. The vault. The will. He wasn't asking. He was piecing together the horrifying mosaic of his own life. I said nothing. This was his moment of reckoning, not mine. I had handed him the truth, he had to decide its weight. Lena saw the finality in his eyes. The fight drained from her, replaced by a cold, calculating survival instinct. Robert, she began, her voice stripped of its usual melodic warmth, now flat and businesslike. You need to understand. Alistair was a monster. He would have left me with nothing. I took what was mine. I came here, I built a life, with you. What does it matter what my name was before? It matters, my father said, his voice trembling with a grief so profound it seemed to age him. A decade in seconds. Because none of it was real. You weren't building a life with me. You were hiding in mine. Using me as a storage locker for your stolen life. He looked at me, his eyes filled with an apology that spanned years. And you used my son. You made me doubt him. That was the wound that would never fully heal for him. Not the stolen money, not the fake name. But the fact that he had allowed her to drive a wedge between us. That he had chosen her lies over his own son's silent observations. The unraveling was swift and clinical after that. My father, the gentle history professor, was gone. In his place was a man I barely recognized. His voice cold and precise as he laid out her options. You will go to the vault with me, today. You will sign over every asset, every bond. Every stolen pearl to a trust I will create to return them to their rightful owner. You will sign a statement confessing to the theft from Alistair Finch. And you will walk out of this house with the clothes on your back and nothing else. And if I refuse? She challenged, a last, desperate spark of defiance. Then I call the police and give them the evidence my son has collected, he said. His gaze unwavering. And I call Alistair Finch. I understand he's been looking for his wife for a very long time. The mention of her former husband's name was the final key turning in the lock. The color fled her face completely. She knew Alistair's brand of vengeance would make prison look like a sanctuary. She went with him to the vault. I didn't join them. Some ruins are best not witnessed. When my father returned hours later, he was alone. He looked exhausted, hollowed out, but his back was straight. He held a single, velvet pouch. He can have the rest, my father said, his voice rough. But these. Your mother would have loved these. He poured the contents onto the table. 23 perfect black pearls, their dark fire glowing in the lamplight. Joined the one I had found. The full set. We sat in the quiet of the reclaimed house. The ghost of her perfume was already fading, replaced by the simple, honest scent of old books and wood polish. The revenge was complete. It had been quiet, bloodless, and utterly devastating. My father looked at me, his eyes clear for the first time in years. You were the only truth in that whole house of lies, Kai, he said. Thank you for being patient with an old, foolish man. I hadn't won. We had simply survived. But as I looked at the pearls, a beauty born from irritation and layers of nacre, I understood. Her lies had been the grit, the constant, painful irritation. And our survival, the fragile understanding being built in the quiet between us, was the pearl. It was a terrible, painful way to create something new, but it was ours. And it was, finally, real. The house was different now. The silence was no longer heavy with secrets, but light with the simple truth of our shared loss. We were two survivors on a raft. The wreckage of my father's marriage to Cassandra fading behind us. He spent long hours in his study, not brooding, but meticulously compiling evidence. Working with lawyers to quietly return Alistair Finch's stolen property. It was his penance, his way of reclaiming his own integrity. One evening, he called me into the study. The velvet pouch of black pearls sat on his desk. Alistair's lawyers have been appreciative, he said, a dry, humorless note in his voice. He doesn't want these back. Considers them tainted. He said to consider them a finder's fee. I looked at the dark, luminous orbs. They were beautiful, but they would always be tainted by the lie they represented. My father followed my gaze. I was thinking, he said slowly, we could sell them. Use the money to start a small grant in your mother's name. For marine biology students. A real legacy, not a stolen one. The rightness of the idea settled over me. It was the perfect end to the story. Taking the symbol of Cassandra's greed and deception and transforming it into a monument to my mother's forgotten dream. It was a quiet, profound alchemy. Dad, I said, the word feeling more significant than it had in years. That's perfect. He nodded, a genuine, if weary, smile touching his lips for the first time in weeks. Good. We didn't talk much about what happened. There was no need. The evidence was filed away, the legalities handled. The real work was happening here, in the quiet spaces between us. We started having dinner together every night, not out of obligation, but because we wanted to. We talked about my future, about his work. About memories of my mother that were no longer painful, but precious. I realized, watching him slowly come back to life, that my revenge had never been about hurting Cassandra. It had been about saving him. About pulling him from the seductive, beautiful web of lies before it consumed him completely. I had used the truth not as a weapon, but as a lifeline. The day the final papers were signed, the grant officially established in my mother's name, my father and I stood together in the garden. The last traces of Cassandra's preferred, invasive roses had been pulled out. We were preparing the soil for something new, something native and hardy. "It's over," he said, not with a sigh of relief, but with a quiet sense of closure. "It is," I agreed. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and sure. "You were right, you know. What you said that night." Her lies became the only truth. They revealed who she really was. I looked at the freshly turned earth, full of potential. "They also revealed who we are," I said. He squeezed my shoulder, and in that simple gesture, I felt everything we had lost and everything we had found. The revenge was complete, but it was no longer the point. The point was the quiet, solid ground beneath our feet. The point was the future, no longer built on lies, but on the hard earned truth of what we had survived together. We had not just unmasked a ghost, we had banished it, and in the empty space it left behind, we were finally, truly, building a home.